Hi, listeners. This is a quick thank you for listening and for your ongoing support. If you're enjoying the program, please consider clicking the follow or subscribe button if you haven't done so already. It really helps us out. There's no better way to support us than doing that or sharing the show with a friend, colleague, family member, or any new or expecting parent in your life. It's totally appreciated. On with the show. Hi, I'm Sarah Trott, and welcome to the Fourth Trimester Podcast. I'm a new mama, and this podcast is all about postpartum care for the first few months following birth, the time period also known as the fourth trimester. My postpartum doula, Esther Gallagher, is my co-host. She's a mother, grandmother, perinatal educator, birth and postpartum care provider. Fourth trimester care, our topic, is about the practical, emotional, and social support parents and baby require. And importantly, it helps set the tone for the continuing journey of parenting. Hi, this is Sarah Trott. Welcome back to the Fourth Trimester Podcast. Today, we are talking about grandfathers and grandfatherhood and welcoming a baby and the dynamic that men and grandfathers play in that entire situation. So I have a grandfather as a guest here for our program today, and he is very cool. In fact, he even has a podcast called the Cool Grandpa Podcast. So if you like this episode, I encourage you to go listen and follow to his show as well, because it's fantastic. I listened to an episode today, and it was a really, really neat story. Okay, so we're talking about the role of grandfathers in modern day life. And so I think this is useful for sort of anyone to listen to. You don't have to be a granddad to benefit. I think if you're someone who is a neighbor or a supporter or a perinatal professional, I mean, this is going to be relevant because bringing life to this world is universal. It's a really relevant topic for all of us. So I wanted to give you a quick introduction to Greg. As I mentioned, he has his podcast and he has a really unique perspective on how grandparents can be supportive and present and really empowering figures in the lives of their children and their grandchildren. And he and I know each other because of a mutual acquaintance that we have, Jane Honigman, who is the founder of Postpartum Support International. So I'm just thrilled to have you on the show. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate this opportunity to come by and visit with you and talk with your network and audience.
Wonderful. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So, back in 2018 at Christmas, my wife and I got handed a little card, and we kind of thought we knew what was coming. And sure enough, it was an ultrasound image, right? We had my daughter-in-law and my oldest son were spending Christmas with us. And, my wife and I were just ecstatic, and we were so happy and thrilled, especially for them. They had been married for a few years, and so we knew, eventually sometimes babies show up after a little while when people have been together. And so we were looking forward to it. And what started for me was this idea of thinking about, I had a really good relationship with my grandfather. He was a long distance grandparent in that he lived on a farm in Eastern Oregon, and I did a lot of my growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, and the Northern Virginia, D.C. area. And so we would see each other probably every few years for maybe 3 or 4 weeks at a time. But I still had that loving relationship with him. I still felt like I was one of the most important things in his life when I would see him, when we would talk on the phone. And so this got me thinking about okay, so how can I try to be as cool as my grandfather was with me and impactful, right? Why am I still telling stories about him and him letting me ride motorcycles through his wheat fields when I was a teenager? And so that's what started this exploration. And then during that time, I was looking around for resources about grandfathers in particular. And there's a lot of resources for grandparenting. And a lot of those grandparenting resources, I feel, are really much more grandmother related versus grandfathers, which is fine. I mean, grandmothers probably buy most of the magazines, subscribe to most of the blogs, that sort of thing. And I get that. But I wanted to do something that really waved the flag and said, hey, if men are intentional about this role of grandfather, this can have as much of an impact with our grandchildren and our adult children in our communities as much as grandmothers. It'll be different, but it will still be a contribution. And it needs men to be intentional about that and not just be passive. Because I think for a lot of years and decades, especially I'm going to just turn of the 20th century, right? There's a lot of that Victorian kids are to be seen and not heard. After meals, the men go into this room and have cigars and drink and talk business and whatever it is. Grandfathers are there to make sure the family has money is provided for. Grandfathers will sign birthday cards and sign checks for Christmas or holidays, whatever that is. But then that influence wasn't as prevalent, I feel, as how things have started to evolve with the silent generation, the baby boomers for sure, and now Generation X, in terms of being really comfortable with getting down on the floor, playing with kids. If the granddaughter wants to have a Barbie tea party, and I interviewed somebody, he's a 3-star general, and he was like, hey, my granddaughter wants to have a sit-down Barbie tea party. By gosh, I'm throwing my hat on the couch and we're having a tea party, and that's what we're doing. And that's wonderful because I think that really allows men to have our energy, our influence with those grandchildren.
That's neat that you set out on your own, looking for resources, looking for things, and you didn't find anything that was really suited to what you were after. And so here you are creating that content and that framework. So what are some of the shifts that you're seeing, or like, how do you see the role of grandparents and grandfathers, especially evolving in today's landscape?
I think grandfathers are becoming more involved in some of the discussions around, like you said, in the fourth trimester, right? So as maybe babies have issues, and it could be as simple as a club foot, or it could be a hole in the heart, or it could be something else. I think a lot of times previously, typically the moms and the women in that group will circle the wagons around and try to take care of that mom and do all the good things around, comfort. Hey, we're going to get through this. Doctors have a plan. I think traditionally men have kind of been left out of that, and they get updates. I think one of the big things that I'm starting to hear from grandfathers and fathers is being more included in those discussions, much more than just here's the issue with the child, here's the plan, here's what we're doing. I think there's a lot more of having them included in some of the, how are we going to take care of the other children at home if there's other children? How are we going to divide up some of the support functions around the new moms? I think also too that, just being included in those conversations is a big step, because I'll tell you, and it's still there, but I think when we're talking and you hear the phrase like women's issues or something like that, it's almost like a stereotype of like the guy, like about face, leave the room. Like, I don't need to know anything unless it's the direct partner, right? And so I think now we're staying more in the room, or at least we're not leaving altogether. And so I think that's really positive, because I think there's ways that we can feel involved and feel included. And I think back to where sometimes in the delivery, even grandmas and grandpas, moms weren't allowed in there while that was being done and that process was taking place. And I think it had been so sterile for so long that eventually, moms, maybe mother-in-laws, maybe sisters started to get into those delivery rooms. And then where it's appropriate, I mean, you don't want to have a party in there, but, having a dad, having a father of the mother, having some other male support people in the room and part of the process, or at least there, versus smoking cigars out in the waiting room. Not that they let us do that anymore, but, I think that's a big trend that we're starting to see. I think too that we're starting to see people start to recognize that fathers have some emotional needs and even maybe some mental health issues that go on during pregnancies and then after pregnancies, especially young fathers. I mean, the pressure of understanding, are they job secure? I mean, these days now where I think time on a job can be 18 months to 2 years is about average. We see layoffs and hirings and firings and things going on all the time. Is that young new father who's worried about providing for his spouse and for the new baby or the additional baby into the family? What kind of pressure is he facing at work that he's also trying to take care and be supportive at home? So I think there's a lot of things coming into play, which is, it's all positive, but we've got to work it out, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you've experienced being a father and a grandfather yourself and been through a couple of fourth trimesters. You probably could share a little bit of what you can see comparing and contrasting over the years and those experiences.
Oh, sure. So I think going back through that, there was an expectation, certainly, that in the 90s, the husband would be there as part of the support for delivery. There wasn't, I think, as much concern, unless it was almost in crisis, about what's going on with the father, where now my sons that have gone through, each one of my sons and their spouses, they've each have a boy and a girl. So we've got 4 grandkids. And I think seeing them go through it, and one of the things that blew my mind, I wasn't prepared about, nobody told me about, is I'm looking at these pictures, and they're awesome pictures of, hey, here's the new baby and all that stuff. I'm not in the room. And then I'm seeing my son without his shirt on, holding the baby. I'm like, what are you doing, man? Were you in there like just flexing for the nurses? What the heck's going on? And they educated me that that's a little bit of a new part of that process of getting the skin to skin contact, not just with mother and baby, but also with baby and father. And so that was completely different. So yes, there was some giggling and snickering on my side and some things like that. But then I also think too that if the data's there and this is a good thing, then hey, let's embrace it. Let's move on with it, right? Let's keep it in our toolkit. I think that's one of the things that maybe older fathers and grandfathers might have a little bit of a harder time with versus grandmas. I think grandmas, with some of the new parenting and delivery styles and philosophies, adjust a little bit better. I think the older guys were a little bit slower to pick up on that and buy into it. But I think, like, at the end of the day, we want the dads to be a part of it. So as I said, if there's data around some of these new philosophies, these new things, and it's working and it promotes the health of the family unit, then let's get on board. Let's be supportive.
So getting exposed to these things through another generation has been kind of really eye-opening. And I mean, that's neat. So things are evolving and changing for the better as we get more data and evidence around things that are going to support connection and bonding, and the health of the family unit. And you mentioned mental health. So I want to go back to that. I think we hear a lot about postpartum depression and mood disorders, perinatal mood disorders for women. And we know, of course, it's like maybe 1 in 5 women are experiencing that. And it's actually 1 in 10 men. And that's only what we hear, we know that's reported, that we actually have evidence of. So it could even be higher. And it's worth acknowledging that and talking about it. In fact, I actually just watched an episode of Queer Eye, the Las Vegas edition, with my family. And there was one episode where it was like a mom, a dad, and a baby, and they were getting married as part of their makeover thing. And the dad very bravely came on and said, yeah, I experienced some postpartum depression. And I thought that was so cool to be vulnerable and own that and talk about it on TV and normalize that a little bit, because that's another one of those that I think, it's a topic that's associated more with women. And it's nice to acknowledge that this really does exist very much for both sexes.
Absolutely. And I think even when I was younger, and I remember hearing stories about guys going through sympathy pains, and I think even, I don't know, sympathy eating might have been the thing, but also like guys packing on an extra 10, 15 pounds during pregnancies as well. And that might have to do with mom's cravings for different sweets or ice creams or whatever. But I think it's good to talk about this, the postpartum depression in men, because I think it's always been there, but I don't think we always had language around it to be able to talk about it. And to me, it's a little like veterans issues in terms of PTSD or shell shock, whatever you might want to call it. How many of these people throughout history came back from those traumatic events? There's no language around it, and behavior one way or another, or depression, however it manifested itself, was never addressed. You had to have a really sympathetic tribe around that individual to help keep them together. And I think for young men, that's been some of the case. And it touched on it a little bit because you have suddenly, you may now have a new family and you have new stresses and you have new worries. And some of these things may never come to pass because you're projecting into the future and you have some anxiety built around it, which is normal, right? That's also sometimes the pre-wedding jitters, right? What happens in a few years if we're fighting over how do you load a dishwasher and how do these things are all natural, but if you don't know how to express it, if you don't have somebody to kind of walk you through it, put an arm around your shoulder, you're left in isolation, which is absolutely the worst thing, because the more you're isolated, the more you go into that real negative thought spiral and you just can't seem to break yourself out of it. So I'm glad to hear somebody talking about men with postpartum depression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and perinatal mood disorders as well. I was looking up some research and talking about this, and postpartum depression in men. I found a paper saying it occurs in approximately 8 to 10% of fathers, and postpartum depression has the highest prevalence within 3 to 6 months postpartum, but it could develop over a year rather than that initial handful of weeks postpartum. And so some of the signs are irritability, indecisiveness, restricted range of emotion. And those are things that could be observed more frequently in men based on this one research. So I'll link to what I found. So anyone who wants to read more on that can find it in the show notes. But I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And it makes sense because a lot of times, not in every case, you're going to have, mother or mother-in-law that might drop in and stay for 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
4 months, a few weeks to help out. You may have some other support around the mom and the new baby that the dad doesn't necessarily have to worry so much about. And then when that support goes after a little bit of time, a mom or mother-in-law or whoever might wake up and do the bottle feeding at night, and dad can sleep and go to work fresh the next day or home office, whatever it is. When that goes away, all of a sudden the colicky baby that never sleeps, and you have pressures at work, you've got presentations you have to do, you have appointments that you have to make, and you're not running with a lot of sleep. And then you have these pressures that we already talked about building up inside you. I can definitely see how, afterwards up to a year, that really comes into play.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's so much pressure. And there's also not a right way to do it either. And there is a lot of advice out there. There's all kinds of stuff, but finding something that works for you and being flexible in your mindset around that. You really do need to trust your instincts, and what may be right for someone else is not necessarily right in your case. And that's okay. I know you've talked to a lot of people, a lot of folks on your show as well, a lot of granddads. And I'd love to hear if you have any examples of how intentional grandparenting has really positively impacted family dynamics or helped strengthen that parent-grandparent relationship.
Oh, sure. Got all sorts of examples, but one that pops to mind is that there's a woman that I've known for a while and we're connected. Her name's Adrienne, and her mother was a truck driver. So Adrienne's about my age, maybe a little bit younger. So more than 20, under 50, maybe. We'll leave it there. I don't want to get in trouble. But what she shared with me was super powerful. So her mom was a truck driver and was on the road. She was staying and being raised by her grandparents. Well, her grandmother was not the best grandmother in the world. In fact, was rather abusive. to her and resentful that she was around. So one of the things that would happen when things were getting really bad that she would talk about is that her grandfather would sometimes take her into the bedroom away from grandma, who was watching TV and all that. So they needed a space separate, and would pull out a checkerboard, and they would sit there and they would play checkers, and he would just talk and listen and be there. And then he would also do things outside in the home garden and just around the yard involving her. And what that did for Adrian, that she shared with me, was her grandfather gave her a sense of safety and security. And knowing that her grandmother didn't want her around, was rather upset that she was there, that the grandfather, by what he was doing, really felt like she was protected and loved. And so that's one example.
Hey listeners, great news. We've partnered with Every Mother, your go-to destination for evidence-based and on-demand exercise therapy regimens. Whether you're dealing with diastasis recti, preparing for birth, or navigating postpartum recovery, Every Mother has your back. With personalized daily routines tailored to your core and pelvic floor needs, they're here to support you every step of the way. Say hello to a stronger, healthier you with Every Mother. Visit fourthtrimesterpodcast.com/everymother for 10% off your personalized express exercise routine. The discount link is also on our deals page, alongside lots of other amazing exclusive discounts and deals. Again, it's fourthtrimesterpodcast.com, with fourth spelled out FOURTH.
The other part with Adrienne is that she's taken some of those lessons from her grandfather and has started practice and coaching and working with people, doing like being out in nature and nature walks, and some of the healing that can come from just being outdoors and going through and identifying plants. And I forget whether the Japanese have a word for kind of walking through the woods and kind of meditating while you're doing that, but that's what she's doing in Indiana. One of the other ones too that I have is a young woman, and her grandfather had a farm. And so by the time she was 11 or so, it was time to cut hay and get it stored up into the barn. And there were other cousins and brothers and things around there, but Grandpa pulled her out to come do the work with the boys. And so she was baling hay and stacking hay and moving all that stuff around as a young woman. And what she shared with me was, because she was doing that hard physical activity and was part of the boys and her grandfather not treating her any different in that way, that when she got into middle school, she knew that she could do difficult tasks, whether they were physical tasks or whether it was academic tasks. Is that remembrance of, working in the hot fields and throwing hay bales and being expected to do what everybody else did was impactful for her. I've got some other examples, but I don't want to tie us up too much. But yeah, those are just some of the ones. And the thing is like, that's not a grandfather that took grandkids on a Disneyland cruise. That's not grandfathers that, took kids to Paris for a month and went shopping and did all those things. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but it's the small intentional movements. It's the small intentional acts that I think leave the most profound effect on grandchildren.
Thank you for sharing those stories. One of the things that has also come up that I wanted to talk to you about is the dynamic between grandparents and their children and boundaries. I want to talk a little bit about boundaries, and I wonder what your take has been on maybe just from your own lived experience and all the conversations you've had around the dynamics of boundaries when it comes to helping support new parents.
Oh, sure. Well, going into my own experience, with my boys, in the back of my mind, and even sometimes in the front of my mind, I had this expectation as when they were 5, when they were 7, when they're whatever. My job as a dad is to raise them to be productive little taxpayers at some point. And what I mean by that is that by the time they're about 18, graduating from high school, they should be functional enough to be able to go out and make decisions that aren't going to completely wreck their lives. They're not going to be perfect. They have a lot of learning to do, just like I do. I mean, there's a lot, there's a lot of mistakes I've made that have left me a little bruised and bloodied, but I'm still around and I'm still moving forward. They have to go through and have that experience as well. And I know as parents, our natural inclination is to save those kids from making mistakes and going through that pain and that hurt. That's not always the best thing because they need to learn through their what I call non-fatal errors. And what I mean by that is like in business, if we invest $10,000 here, but we have a bankroll of $1 million, if we lose that $10,000, that's going to hurt a little bit, but it's not going to be the end of the world for us. So similar with life, right? And in order for them to gain that wisdom, gain that knowledge, gain that experience that hopefully they share with my grandchildren, I need to keep my mouth shut sometimes, most of the time. And I need to take an indirect approach. If I'm thinking in terms of maybe have they thought of this alternative or that alternative, it's not, hey, you're doing this wrong. It might be a conversation with my son while we're going down to the 7-Eleven to get some gas and a big gulp of, hey, I know you guys are considering X. Have you ever thought about this alternative? They may have, and they may have a completely legitimate reason why they're not going to do that, even though I might feel that that's the right approach, but I'm not living their experience. So I have to keep that in the forefront of my mind. And hopefully most parents, as we learn and we learn to let go and trust the kids, is that we don't have their lived experience. They're going through conversations with their spouse, partners, with their people in their network, their close friends, their family unit that we're not privy to. They've got information we don't have. And so we need to be able to trust them that they're doing what they're doing. If they're about to do something super dangerous, like duct tape my grandson to the hood of the car and drive down I-95, I might say something and jump in at that point. But if it's a case of something really minor where safety and these different things are involved, they'll figure it out. And you know what? If they make the wrong call, they can always change course and do something else and adjust. And then they've gained some experience, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Of course, if it's a matter of safety, that's different.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. And what advice, and I am definitely asking, what advice would you give to someone who's about to become a first-time grandparent or grandfather in particular?
So for first-time grandfathers, absolutely enjoy it. Enjoy the moment. If you're somebody that journals, make sure you're journaling about this. Make sure you're journaling about the anxiety that you're having about what's going to happen, that you're anxious that the baby's going to show up with 10 fingers and 10 toes and everything. Make sure that you're journaling about the excitement and the joys that you're going to have taking that child to the water park and going down the water slides with that grandchild. Make sure, too, that you understand that grandchildren are going to typically react differently to grandmas and grandpas. Not better or worse, but sometimes little granddaughters, when they see grandma and grandpa walk through the front door, are going to come by, and even though grandpas, you have your arms outstretched and you're ready for that hug or whatever, granddaughters might give you a hip check into the wall to get to grandma. And that's okay, because what they're going to do is they're going to circle back around at some point, and they're going to want grandpa to help build a fort in the front room with the cushions from the couch and a blanket. And that's when you're going to have your moment. And so understand that kids are going to react differently. Understand, too, that you're there now in the role of a coach and a sage, and you're not there as a parent. So the discipline, other than, health and safety, leave that to mom and dad. That doesn't mean go out and be obnoxious and spoil, but that means that you're in the role of coach and advisor. You raised your kids, and so this is your children's opportunity to raise their kids. You're there to provide support, insight, and give a little bit of guidance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think it's worth having a direct conversation with the parents?
Absolutely. I think, starting off that when a couple's finding out they're having a child together and, let's say just the in-laws for sake of discussion, I think it's appropriate to start to level set what expectations are, because I think you need to be listening to the adult children saying, hey, we want you involved, but we don't want you dropping in every other day. We need our space. Or, hey, can you help us with this? Because I think sometimes too, parents may assume if grandparents live in the same neighborhood, we've got free babysitting. We've got free daycare. Well, grandma and grandpa might still be having a very active life, and being Monday through Friday childcare may not be up their alley. So being able to sit down and have those discussions and have that communication is super important. And I'll tell you, it's even more important for long distance grandparents, because mom and dad are the gatekeepers. So even as young children start to get familiar with tablets, and they start to get familiar with video chats, and they start to get familiar with these things, we need moms and dads to turn those phones and turn those tablets on at meeting times and have that. So if we don't have good relationships, and I'm going to say mostly moms and mother-in-laws, because they still typically are the ones that do a lot of that planning. But my sons are involved in that as well. You need to have those relationships, and you can't be demanding as grandparents. I want to talk to my grandkids now. It's more of a case of, hey, when's the time that's convenient for you between dinners and going to bed and brushing teeth and everything else, and really working with them. Otherwise, you're going to find that I think you end up with a little bit of estrangement starting to creep in, because you're not going to get text messages responded to quite so much. You're not going to have people willing to do video chats on a Sunday afternoon because the relationship is fraying a little bit. So over communicate, even level set those expectations, and then make sure that you're making the adult children, sons-in-laws, daughter-in-laws, whatever the case may be, make sure you're making every effort to make them allies, and that you're doing that so that you can be as involved with the grandchildren as you would like to be and as they would like you to be.
So some of those questions could be, how can I support you? What would that look like? And just kind of kick off a conversation really simply.
Oh, 100%. I think when our daughter-in-laws were getting close to delivery, some of the questions that we were asking just point blank was like, when would you like us to come up? We would like to visit, the day of or day after or whatever, but that may be too soon. And we know that from just listening to different experiences from different moms and not wanting to overwhelm. So there's a communication of like, when do you, as the mom, want us to come up and visit with you, check in on you, and check in on the new baby that we want to celebrate this happy event.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I've heard a number of stories about surprise. Hey, I'm on your doorstep. I'm ready to move in for weeks. And it's just like, wait, this wasn't even a discussion. And it can be hard because, as a family member showing up to support, like there's this expectation, and it can feel like rejection if you're like, oh no, we actually want some space and some quiet bonding time for a little while. We want to be in a bubble. So I love that. I love the advice of having a transparent conversation up front, especially around early visitation. And on the other side, it kind of seems like a conversation about permission, right? Because you might have a very willing father, a very willing grandfather who wants to participate, but just really doesn't know how and doesn't necessarily feel invited. So it can be a matter of a conversation. Hey, we would really like you to be involved. Here's some things that would be really helpful for us. And you don't have to do it, but this would be really helpful. I mean, granddads can do a lot. Granddads can help with all the practical things. In fact, we have episodes that I'll link to on like how a friend or family member can help during the fourth trimester. that's not just about women. That's about everybody. So I'll put a link down in the show notes for that one. And we also have one about how to be a helpful, supportive visitor, because a lot of it is about, respecting boundaries and creating that alignment and having those discussions up front. So I really appreciate that advice. Are there any stories or pieces of advice that come to mind around like meaningful ways that grandparents can support during that initial fourth trimester?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we can do is make sure that we're checking in to see what kind of support network the parents have. Especially, again, I'm going back to being a little bit of a long distance parent and grandparent. Both my sons live probably 400 and 500 miles away. And so checking in, I think, how strong is that support network with friends? How much do they need? Maybe we could do something and set up a food delivery program for a month just to cut down on shopping list trips. What did maybe moms didn't get during the baby shower that they could still use that we could help out with? Also, I would say a big thing around this whole idea of men talking about mental health and postpartum depression amongst men is dads and even moms. Check in with your sons. I know everybody is focused on the moms, and that's appropriate, but I think we need to check in on the sons, and we need to be able to, hey, how's work going? Boy, how's the baby going? Oh, you're up all night? Are you guys getting some rest on the weekends? Do you have a babysitter that might be able to come in? Do you have a sister that's close by that could take the baby for a little bit? What are you doing also to make sure that you're staying strong as a couple? Because I think sometimes it can be very natural that the mom appropriately focuses in on the baby and the baby's health and everything else. And sometimes the guys feel like maybe we're pushed out a little bit. So making sure, are there plans to start to re-engage as a couple at some point that's appropriate? Maybe it's not going out to dinner because we can't do that, but maybe you're going out to lunch, just the two of you on a Saturday afternoon. And so it doesn't have to be huge grand gestures. Maybe it's just starting to reconnect and being able to have 2 hours without stinky diapers and feedings going on, that the two of you can talk about what's going on as a couple. So I think grandparents can definitely help make sure some of the food, some of the support, some of the things you can do from afar are being done, and that you're checking in with the sons, and then also checking in with the daughter and daughter-in-laws. Maybe there's some postpartum depression that's starting to pop up that maybe you can clue in on, that maybe the spouse and partner may be not seeing because they're there every single day, right? So some of the signs of depression that are going on, is this, hey, I'm just exhausted, or is this mom is now starting to struggle a little bit? And do we need to close ranks and get some help and get some things in place to help mom out as well? So I think it's keep those eyes wide open, keep the communication lines going, and then do what you can and what's appropriate to support that young family.
Mm-hmm. And you can find information on postpartum.net, which is the Postpartum Support International website, about the warning signs and things to look for. I think the vast majority of folks experience some degree of baby blues. And when it extends beyond a couple of weeks, and there are a number of signs that you can kind of watch for that might clue someone in, like, hey, this might be worth having a conversation with a professional like your doctor or someone who is part of your medical support network, just to have a conversation. So, yeah.
Yeah. And definitely I would, in those cases, use the indirect approach. Dads, don't go to your daughters and go, I think you're super depressed and have postpartum depression. You need to go see somebody now. That's not always effective. So use those indirect approach, use those probing questions, those open-ended questions. And I say that because sometimes guys just want to bulldoze straight ahead, and we need to be coached up that indirect approach can get us to where we want to go a lot faster and a lot further than the direct approach.
Yes, agreed. Greg, we've covered a lot. What other final thoughts do you have for our listeners?
Just if you're a granddad and you're feeling very unsure of where you fit in this new family unit, or maybe it's an existing family unit, just know that your impact is valued and that you've got wisdom, you have value in that. And maybe if you're not being invited in, maybe start to ease your way into those things. Don't go bulldozing yourself into it, but start to ease yourself and then start to give indications that you want to be involved. I think sometimes people think, oh, so-and-so hasn't said anything or done anything, so, granddad really doesn't want to be involved. You have to also show some initiative. So I just encourage dads, granddads, if you're kind of on the sidelines, do what you can to get into the game.
Great. Thank you. Greg, where can people learn more about you?
I've got the Cool Grandpa Podcast that you can find just about everywhere. I've also got a website, cool-grandpa.us. And from there, you can find Facebook and LinkedIn. I've also got some merchandise as well as, blogs and all the podcasts are linked in there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really have appreciated this.
You can subscribe to this podcast in order to hear more from us. Thank you for listening, everyone, and I hope you'll join us next time on the Fourth Trimester. The theme music on this podcast was created by Sean Trott. Hear more at soundcloud.com/Sean Trott. Special thanks to my true loves, my husband Ben, daughter Penelope, and baby girl Evelyn. Don't forget to share the Fourth Trimester podcast with any new and expecting parents. I'm Sarah Trott. Goodbye for now.
Hello again, bicycle man. I know you're doing all that you can. I wrote the song, simple and true. I wrote the song, I'll sing a song for you. You got your wheels, you got your gears. You ride around town without any fear. You got your pedals, you got your brakes. You always wear your helmet for safety's sake. Hello again, bicycle man. I know you're doing all that you can. I wrote the song, simple and true. I wrote the song, I sing a song for you. Hello again, bicycle man. I know you're doing the best that you can. I wrote the song, simple and true. I wrote the song, I sing a song for you.